The moment I pulled up to my lakeside cabin, I felt that deep breath of peace I'd been needing for months. Quiet water, crisp air, no traffic, no stress. No stress, just what I needed. I'd owned the place for years, but hadn't visited in a while. So spending a long weekend there felt like a much-needed reset. I was unloading my truck when she appeared, arms crossed, eyes narrowed, walking straight toward me like she owned the land. I didn't know her name yet, but it didn't take long to figure out. Around here, folks called her HOA Karen. She didn't say hello. No welcome, just jumped straight to, "You can't be here. This is private property." I stared at her, a little stunned. I calmly explained that this was my cabin, showed her the keys in my hand, even pointed to the deed posted in the window. But she wasn't having it. Said I looked suspicious and told me to leave before she called the sheriff, when I didn't move. She called 911 right in front of me. Now here's the part Karen didn't know, and it's where this story takes a sharp turn. I didn't just own the cabin. I owned the land surrounding it, and not just that, through a family trust and some long-standing property deals. I actually own nearly everything in this remote lakeside town, including the road she walked in on. But the moment the officers arrived and she found out who I really was, let's just say everything changed. As I stood on the porch waiting for the cops to show up, Karen paced back and forth like she was preparing for a courtroom drama. She kept muttering about trespassers and how she had connections with the board. I just leaned on the railing, sipping my coffee, wondering how far she was going to take this. She didn't know anything about me, where I was from, what I did, or what kind of history my family had in this area. All she saw was someone she didn't recognize, and in her mind, that was enough to make me a threat. She pointed out MEDA rules, claiming the cabin violated HOA guidelines, even though this area wasn't under any homeowners association at all. That was her first mistake. Her second was assuming I didn't belong because I didn't look like a property owner. Whatever that means. The deeper issue was becoming clearer. It wasn't about a cabin or rules. It was about control. I stayed calm because I'd dealt with people like her before. And this time, I had something she didn't expect: paperwork. Legal, filed, and airtight. My family had owned this land for generations. After my grandfather passed, the property was rolled into a larger estate trust that included more than 80% of the land surrounding the lake. But Karen wasn't backing down. She kept glancing at the road, waiting for the police, fully convinced she was about to see me get hauled off. Little did she know what was really coming. About 15 minutes later, 2 sheriff's deputies pulled up in their cruiser, lights off but clearly ready for something. Karen rushed over before they even stepped out, waving her arms and pointing at me like I was some kind of threat. I just stood there, calm, holding the deed folder under my arm. One of the deputies approached me while the other tried to calm her down. He asked me what was going on, and I explained clearly, calmly, with documents in hand. I told him this cabin had been in my family since before Karen was even born, and that this land wasn't part of any HOA. The look on his face changed the moment he glanced at the property maps I brought out. But even with that, Karen wouldn't quit. She started throwing out phrases like community standards, unauthorized occupation, and even said I was posing a safety concern. That's when the story really started unraveling. Turns out, she wasn't just acting on her own. A few neighbors, who I hadn't even met yet, had also complained about me. Strangers suddenly worried I was a disruption. Funny how no one seemed to have a problem with the cabin until I actually showed up. I started to wonder what kind of story Karen had been spreading around. I hadn't said a word to these people, but somehow I was already being labeled. The tension wasn't just about properties, was about assumptions, and the lies that travel faster than truth. The longer the deputies stayed, the more uncomfortable things got. One of them started asking Karen some pointed questions like who told her I didn't own the property and where exactly she got her information. She stumbled through her answers, getting defensive, her voice rising with every sentence. It was clear she hadn't expected anyone to push back. Her confidence was cracking, but she still refused to let it go. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through screenshots, trying to prove I wasn't listed in the HOA registry X. Again, my cabin wasn't under HOA jurisdiction at all. It never had been. That's when one of the neighbors showed up. He walked straight up the drive and stood next to Karen, arms crossed like backup had arrived. I didn't know the guy, but he looked at me like he already had a story in his head. He asked if I had permission to use the shared lake access road, another thing that technically fell under my family's original land deed. The very road they all drove in on. It was on our property, a detail most people around here had either forgotten or just ignored. More neighbors started to gather, watching from a distance, whispering, taking photos. Suddenly, I wasn't just dealing with Karen. I was standing in front of a whole group that had already decided I didn't belong. The pressure built with every question, every sideways glance. They had no idea who they were messing with. But they were about to find out. Just when I thought things couldn't get more intense. One of the deputies pulled me aside and quietly said, "There's something you should know." Turns out, Karen had already filed a formal complaint with the county office the day before I arrived, claiming that the cabin had been abandoned, and that she was acting as a temporary caretaker until ownership could be clarified. That hit me like a brick. She wasn't just bluffing to scare me off, she'd actually tried to legally wedge herself into my property. I pulled out my phone and forwarded the deputy a digital copy of the estate trust. It included everything: parcel numbers, deed history, even the survey maps. He nodded, clearly taking it seriously. But while we were talking, I noticed Karen and the neighbor still whispering, now looking a little less confident. Something was going on behind the scenes. That's when I remembered a conversation my grandfather had once had with me years ago. He warned that if we ever let the land sit too long without use, certain local groups might try to take advantage of it. That neighbor, he wasn't just some local. He was on the board of a development group that had been trying to expand Lakeside property access. They didn't just want me gone. They wanted the land. All of it. What started as a petty HOA encounter was quickly turning into a quiet land grab and standing in their way. Unknowingly until now, was me the guy who owned the whole county. With everything adding up, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I told the deputy I'd be heading to the county office myself first thing the next morning. What Karen and her developer friend didn't count on was that I still had full legal access to the original land trust documents, so detailed they included right-of-way maps, water rights, and even mineral claims. My grandfather was thorough like that. I had the paperwork scanned and emailed to both the county and the sheriff's department before sunrise. By noon, things changed fast. The county clerk called to confirm not only my ownership of the cabin, but also that Karen's complaint was invalid and possibly fraudulent. The deputy returned to the property that afternoon, this time not to question me, but to speak directly. With Karen and the neighbor, watching their expressions shift from smug to speechless was something I'll never forget. And here's the twist: while reviewing the development board's filings, the county discovered that the group Karen's friend was involved with had quietly filed multiple requests to rezone surrounding land for commercial use, including parts of my property. That was the real reason behind all of this. The cabin wasn't the issue, it was what it stood on. The county launched an investigation. Karen was issued a formal notice for false reporting, and the development group's plans were put on hold indefinitely. But the biggest surprise? A week later, I got an anonymous letter in the mail. Some people don't forget. Watch your back. At first, that anonymous letter had me on edge. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized it was nothing but a scare tactic one. Last desperate move from someone who lost their grip on a plan that backfired. I passed it along to the sheriff just to be safe, and they promised to keep an eye out, but I didn't let it shake me. I wasn't about to be run off land that's been in my family for generations. In the weeks that followed, things settled down. The cabin was quiet again, the lake just as peaceful as I remembered. Karen stopped showing up completely, and the developer's name disappeared from every local filing. A few neighbors, the ones who had been distant at first, came by to apologize. Turns out they'd been fed half-truths and rumors and never questioned them. I didn't hold a grudge, I just told them next time. Ask before judging. I spent the rest of the summer fixing up the cabin, clearing trails, and finally doing what? I came here for finding peace. But the whole experience stuck with me. It reminded me how quickly people can make assumptions, and how power, whether from an HOA title or a board position, can be misused if no one stands up to it. So yeah, HOA Karen called 911 and tried to push me out of my own land. But in the end, she learned the hard way. I didn't just own a cabin, I owned the whole county.